Lots of questions. I grab the first. And the first is, do you believe the things you write about, or is it pure fiction for you? I've never been convinced that there's such a wonderfully clear-cut dichotomy between the two things. When you start writing, you're in a profession which involves making stuff up and inventing stuff. You're making up people, you're making up places, you're talking about things that manifestly aren't true. And if you're doing it right, you're using all of these fictions, all of these lies, all of these made-up things to say true things. So, and true things that you can believe, and true things that you can stand behind. So I never feel that it's as clear-cut as fiction and fact. If it works, you are creating fiction to make truth. This is from Paolo Furtado. Is there a character out of all of your books you would say is most like yourself? Every now and then I will actually, but particularly in short stories, I'll pretty much put myself into a story. There are a handful of writers who are very obviously me. The person narrating The Price, which is a short story about a black cat, is me. The narrator of Trollbridge isn't me, but some of the things that happened to him as a child pretty much happened to me as a child, except for meeting a troll. You know, you go and you raid your memories and you raid your life. So, and that's true for the good characters and it's true for the evil characters. You go and find that part of yourself that could do those things or could be that thing. If it's true, that's how it has to work. I don't know that there's any one character. But I don't think it's as simple as that. Going, yes, this character is me and all of these characters are somebody else. Because the truth is, if they're in my book, they're all me in some way. This is from Andrew Wofford. He begins, "Hi, I'm Andrew." Hi, Andrew. What's your current dream project? That can include a novel, series of novels, collaborations with others, or, I wonder, film project. Oh, dream project. I'd like to do some plays. I'd really like to do some theatre. I've not done any yet, not really. I did The Wolves and the Walls children's opera, and that was fun. Would love to do some live theatre. Would love to do some really strange live theatre, because I'm fascinated by the way that theatre changes night after night. It's not the same. So, yeah, that would be my dream project, I think, right now. Will S. Spencer, April 26, says, "What is your perfect meal?" Oh, I'm a sucker for sushi, and a sucker for really good sushi. And even though I've practically become a vegetarian in the last few months, my perfect meal would be something like the lunch that I had in a department store once in Japan, in a little rooftop restaurant, where I just sat down and a sushi chef fed me until I could eat no more. And everything was perfect. Everything melted in my mouth. I didn't even know what half of these things were, and it was magic. Mark Plattner says, "Your future you visits from the future. Anytime, it could be tomorrow's you if you want, or the elder you, but not the double you. What would you like him to tell you?" I would hate it if future me turned up and told me anything. Where would be the fun in that? That's like somebody coming in from telling you how a book ends. It will be like somebody moving over and saying, you know, the butler did it. You don't want to know that the butler did it. The fun of reading the book is to find out. I was pondering this the other day, because there was a point in 2005 at the Sundance Film Festival where I was in the same room as my now wife, and we didn't know each other, and we hadn't met, but I knew who she was and could have walked over and talked to her, and occasionally think, what would have happened if I'd walked over and just said, hello, you don't know me, but in 5 years' time I will be marrying you. And I think that would be really crazy and kind of creepy. Might be a book one day. Right. Christina Rudenborg. Do you think that the fantasy fiction genre will become so heavy with all the stories about vampires, werewolves, fair people and the likes that publishers will finally become fed up and not want to accept anymore? Will they start to lean towards more realistic stories and away from the mysticism and fantasy of what is currently very, very popular? Will the seesaw of pop culture tip all the up-and-coming fantasy writers into the water before we get a chance? Yes, it definitely will. Actually, it may do. You know, there was a point in the 1980s when, particularly for young adult fiction and children's fiction, fantasy was completely unfashionable and very much disliked. Genres come and genres go. When I was a kid, if you walked around a big bookshop, you would run into the cowboy section of the bookshop. And I don't think I've seen a cowboy section of a bookshop now in over 30 years. The horror sections of many bookshops were closed down about 10 years ago when they decided that horror really wasn't selling in the way that it had during the big horror booms. And I was talking to a man who worked in a bookshop who was telling me about having to decide whether they went into the thriller section or whether they went into the fantasy section. So yeah, genres come and genres go, and yes, people will get very tired of whatever is fashionable today, and they will want something new tomorrow. As a writer, that's not a bad thing. All it means is write what you care about, write what you're interested in, write what matters to you, and write it as well as you can. And it will probably find its audience. And that has nothing to do with fashion. That has to do with quality of the story. But the things that will be much harder to publish are the second-rate knockoffs of stuff. You know, a great vampire novel will be published whether there's a glut of vampires or whether vampires have become so unfashionable as to be unpublishable. But that's always true of a great book. A great book will always be published. Or you hope it will.